Amen. Well, we're going to be in Ecclesiastes tonight. And so there's just so much in Ecclesiastes. It's one of those books, I just love it. It's one of those books that you have to kind of read with a notebook because it changes scenes so often. I mean, like when there was prayer about the state of the dead this evening, there's one of the strongest sections about the state of the dead in the entire Bible is right in the heart of Ecclesiastes chapter 10. And so many different subjects come up. Subjects about the court system, subjects about farming, subjects about the king, subjects about animals. So many different subjects come up, and we can learn so many different things. That if you read it with kind of a notebook and go, okay, subject, and here's this subject, and kind of put the subjects together. Anyway, let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. We'll start right in verse 1. It says, the words of the sage, son of David, king in Jerusalem. The word sage is very, very hard to translate. It comes from a word that means to gather, to bring together. In this case, we think that he's bringing together wisdom. So I think sage is a good translation. Some versions say teacher. He is a teacher, but doesn't seem to be primary here. Some say preacher. That's certainly kind of a little misleading. That's not exactly what's going on. It's just a very difficult word to translate it from the Hebrew because we don't have an exact equivalent. But sage kind of captures the general meaning. He's a very wise man who's gathered a whole bunch of information. So the words of the sage, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, normally, we would think the words of the sage, son of David, king in Jerusalem, we would think Solomon. We don't really know who wrote Ecclesiastes. It could have been Solomon. If it was, it would have been early on in his life and ministry because as Solomon got into his life and got distracted by women and got distracted by money, he ended up turning against God, building pagan temples, oppressing the people, and that kind of thing. And this would not have been something that he would have written, or if he wrote it, he certainly wouldn't have believed in it. So there are other people that would qualify. Son of David wouldn't have to be Solomon because, if you remember Jesus Christ, who lived, almost 900 years after David, is called the son of David too. Anyone in the lineal descendancy of David would be called the son of David. So here when it says the words of the sage, son of David, king in Jerusalem, could be Solomon early on in his reign, could be someone else, could be somebody like Uzziah, good King Uzziah, or Hezekiah, somebody like that. Not really sure. And then what he does is he takes a natural man perspective. And that's one of the things you see in the book of Ecclesiastes is that the perspective of the writer changes from time to time. In fact, sometimes as you're writing, you think he's pretty depressed, and then he kind of bounces back. And here he starts out very much as a natural man and how a natural man feels and how they would express themselves. So he says, verse 2, utterly pointless, says the sage, utterly pointless, everything is pointless. And so now you're getting a feel, if you're trying to think empathetically, this is how a lot of people feel. And that's one of the reasons that suicide around the world is so high. There are so many things in the world that are pointless. And the devil sets life up so it's that way. Like you can work your whole life and not end up with enough at retirement that you can even retire comfortably. There's so many different things that can happen in life. That's one of the reasons why, why Christians need to take care of each other. Remember that Galatians says to be especially kind to the household of faith. We help each other out along the way. We're also especially kind to our families. Proverbs says that a wise person leaves an inheritance for his children's children. Well, why is that? Because it's very hard to start with nothing as a child and actually make it to have enough in life. And so if you are one of those who make it enough in life, the Bible is encouraging us to help our children, because the devil is the ruler of the world. He works very hard to take wealth away from believers. He really does. And so we have to help each other. We have to advise each other. Sometimes we have to insert ourselves in the lives of other people that need help and may not know where to turn. But it's just good stuff to be aware of. But if we're talking to people that are considering suicide, this is a lot of where they're coming from. They don't have meaning in their life because they don't have God. That's something that Ecclesiastes is very clear in pointing out. We'll get there. But as a human being, what do you do with yourself if this is the way you feel? Pointless, utterly pointless. Then you just end your life, and a lot of people do. And then he says, verse 3, what does a man gain from all his toil at which he toils under the sun? Again, this is a natural man speaking. Now, you and I know that if you are wise and you do things properly, generally speaking, not all the time, but generally speaking, you will have profit at the end of your life to pass on to somebody else. But the other side of the coin is, even if you don't, it says, what do you gain from your toil? If you are toiling in the name of the Lord, if your work is focused on God, if you're trying to be a good worker, a good example, and a godly person, then you are building up rewards, even if those rewards don't manifest themselves in this life. But he goes on in just kind of his natural man thinking, verse 4, a generation goes, another generation comes, the earth remains forever. And so he's pointing out that it's just a cycle, people come and go, and what's the point? And then he personalizes the sun, he personifies the sun here and makes it tired. He says the sun also rises and sets. Now, he understands that somehow or other, it's got to get from where it set behind you in the west to where it rises in the east. Somehow it's got to get there. And so he envisions it having to hurry. Don't know where it goes, but wherever it is, it has to hurry to get way back over there because it spent the whole day going over here. And now it's got to hurry. And so he says, the sun rises and it sets, and panting returns to its place where it rises. The idea is the sun is constantly on the move, constantly running, can't rest, can't get a break. And then verse 6, going towards the south and circling to the north. Circling is the wind. And again, the emphasis on we're doing this over and over and over. That's the toil gets done over and over, the generations over and over, the sun over and over. Now it's the wind circling over and over again. But then on its own circuits, the wind returns. And it's intriguing that at the time that this was written, which is probably going to be somewhere in the 900s or 800s BC, to our knowledge, no one really understood that the winds had circuits, like what you and I know as the trade winds and that kind of thing, that have global circuits. They didn't know about that, but God did, and God inspired the writing of this. And when people say, well, do you have any proof that the Bible is true? This is some of that proof, that the Bible has scientific information embedded in it that was unavailable at the time the Bible was written. When let's just say Solomon wrote this, if Solomon wrote this, and somebody would say, well, how do you know that? Solomon would just have to say, well, God showed it to me. And then verse 7, all the streams go into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the streams flow, they return to flow again. You and I know that as the hydrologic cycle. The streams run into the ocean, the sun evaporates the ocean water, it distills down on the earth as rain, and the cycle starts all over again. They didn't know that at the time this was written. The hydrologic cycle wasn't discovered until quite late in the scientific world. And it would be a mystery. You watch great rivers that run into the ocean and the ocean never fills up. Like, what happens to all the water? Where does it go? And so here, 900-ish BC, God was showing people how the earth worked in a way that other people, people of the world just simply didn't know. Verse 8, all things are full of weariness. The person can't express it. And that can be true. That's one of the reasons we need to rest. One of the reasons we need to be purposeful in what we do. Otherwise, life just becomes wearisome. And it says, the eye's not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. And that's another thing that we learn from the Sabbath. Give your eyes a break. Don't wake up in the morning and start watching TV immediately. And, then you go from early morning TV or your telephone to computer, back to late night TV. Give your eyes a break, give your ears a break, that kind of thing. That really helps. Research that's been done on people who have mental breakdowns it's discovered that they don't take rests. They don't give their body a break. And your brain can just fill up and it gets overloaded. You've all been there in a mini fashion, so to speak, when there's just so many different weird things coming at you, and you're just like, and you just, I got to get out for a second. I've got to slow down. Well, that needs to happen on a macro level as well. Make sure that you weave into your life just some quiet time, prayer time, meditation time, whatever. God commanded that in the Old Testament with the Sabbath. But we don't today keep a strict Sabbath, but we should still rest. So verse 8, things are full of weariness. Verse 9, what has been is what will be. What has been done is what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. And especially in the biblical times, today there's all kinds of new inventions and that kind of thing. And you're thinking, oh, well, that's kind of new. And there are new aspects to it, but basically there's not a whole lot discovered that's really genuinely new. But at this time period, there wasn't a lot new at all. Verse 10, there is a thing about which one might say, look, this is new, but it already was in ages ago that came before us. So, oh well, good thought. Verse 11, there's no recollection of former things, and also there will be no recollection of those things that are still to come by those who will come after them. And that is another thing that is helpful for you and I who believe in God, because I know the name of my grandfather. I don't know the name of my great-grandfather. I could find it out if I went to Ancestry.com or whatever. But just as a matter of common course, you tend to know and remember the people that you meet and people that you don't know and don't meet. You simply don't know them. And that, especially if you're working hard to build a legacy, but then you don't really know if that's going to happen or whatever, it can be very frustrating. It can be hurtful. And again, it leads people into depression, into despondency. But if we know there's a God and there's going to be a resurrection and there's going to be everlasting life, then this idea there's no recollection of former things, no, there will be for us. All those former people, you read the Bible, you want to meet Adam and Eve, fine, you can meet them. I believe that Adam sinned pretty wildly, but seems like he bounced back, and people like that. You want to meet people like that. You want to meet people like Abraham, generations, lost, and yet they're going to be there in the resurrection, and we'll get to meet them. But so that's the beginning from 1 to 11 that just kind of sets the general tone of the natural man who thinks life is pointless, everything is frustrated. So break forth, verse 12, the king, I, the sage, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. And, he says, he's the sage, he's wise, he's going to figure this out. Okay, what's the meaning of life? What's the purpose of life? Why are we here? except he's attacking it from the point of view of a natural man. Nevertheless, what he's written here has a lot of truth, even scientific truth in it. So verse 13, he says, I applied my heart to seek and search out by wisdom, using wisdom, concerning all that's done under the heavens. And he probably did that for a while. That's like earning 3 PhDs. He said it's a burdensome business that God has given to the sons of men to be busy with. And that's kind of what happens. It doesn't make a huge, in the end of the end, it doesn't make a huge difference. You're still going to die. That's as simple as it is. So it's a great thing to be busy with. Verse 14, I've seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, everything is pointless and hurting the wind. And that's an interesting phrase, hurting the wind, because of course you can't hurt the wind. So it's a figure, if you will, for impossibility. Can't do it. And so he says, I've looked at everything done under the sun, and everything's pointless. And he's going to describe why in the verses that come up, because you just die and leave everything that you worked for to somebody else. And so what was the point of all your hard work? So he says, verse 15, what is bent cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. And this should have a lot of meaning to us right now. What is bent can't be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I find myself in this thought, and here we are in an election year coming up. In just a few months, there'll be an election. And I find myself thinking, boy, if this people and this people and this people could get in office, then things would really be great. And the answer is no, actually, they won't. They might improve temporarily, and some things might improve temporarily, but there will still be death. There will still be disease. There will still be evil people on the planet. There will still be lying and cheating. There will still be huge disappointments. And I think it's important to have a healthy attitude about that. I was on the phone with someone today who they had a relative who was having problems, and he was angry at God. And why is he angry at God? And we talked about it a little bit. And people have unrealistic expectations. Well, God's God. He can straighten this stuff out. No, he can't. God's God. He loves people, so he gave Adam the dominion of the world. That's a loving thing to do. That's like being a boss and giving people the freedom to do their own job. So God gave the dominion of the world to Adam. Adam gave it to the devil. The devil tried to give it to Jesus Christ. Fall down and worship me, and all of this will be yours. It was given to me, and I can give it to whomever he please. I please, said the devil in Luke 4:6. So it's much more true in verse 15, what is bent cannot be straightened, than believing if these people get in office, or if this happens, or if that happens, things will be straightened, because they won't be until Jesus Christ comes back. So we've got to keep our expectations under control so that we don't end up feeling depressed and that kind of thing. Verse 16, I said to myself, behold, I've magnified and increased in wisdom above all who were over Jerusalem before me. Yet my heart has seen much wisdom and now, yes, my heart has seen much wisdom and knowledge. Verse 17, I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and foolishness. In other words, I want to understand the whole spectrum here. Wisdom, madness, craziness, foolishness. And I perceived that this also was hurting the wind. When you get through knowing all that stuff, what do you know? What can you do with it? Verse 18, for in much wisdom is much frustration, and he who increases knowledge increases pain. And that's interesting because, if you talk to people who watch the news all day, they tend to be frustrated. They tend to have, anger. That you've just got to watch yourself and what goes into your mind. There's such a tightrope between being informed and being over-informed or over-focused. And it was probably 15 years ago now, I was listening to a teaching by a guy out of the Durham, Raleigh, North Carolina, Duke University area, who was associated with an institute called the Heart's Code Institute. And he was talking about heart attacks because, people say, well, if you got high cholesterol, you're going to have a heart attack, or if you have this, you're going to have a heart attack. And he said, the Heart Code Institute did studies on gazillions of people. I have no idea how many people they studied, but they studied all these different people and gave them huge quizzes with all these gazillions of questions about lifestyle and their medicines and yeah. And what they found out was that a higher predictor of heart attacks, higher than cholesterol, was level of education. That smart people read the newspaper, listen to the news every day, get hot and bothered by what's going on the face of the earth. We're worried about what's happening in the planet. We're worried about what's happening with plastics in the ocean. We're worried about what is going on with the election. We're worried about the death of animals, the burning of the Brazilian rainforest. I mean, we're just worry. And the next thing you know, you have a heart attack. And here's Solomon or whoever, not 2,900 years ago-ish, has he who increases knowledge increases pain. And it's literally true. Now, does that mean we should all walk around stupid? No, of course not. But what it means is we do need to watch our focus so that we're not educating ourselves into depression, if you will. So let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. So now the sage here launches off into different things that he thinks will make him happy, because that's the goal eventually, is to find out what's the point of life and what's going to be valuable, what's going to make me happy. That seems like a good thing to do. So verse 1, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. Now, pleasure is just sitting around doing pleasurable things. Except, God designed us to work. It's very difficult to go against your God-given fabric. In Genesis, it says God put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to work it and care for it. And in doing that, they would have joy and blessing and find some purpose in life. It wouldn't be the sole purpose of their life, but it would help them enjoy their life. And so he says, I'm going to test you with pleasure. Now that sounds like a good thing to do, that, if I want to have fun in life, I should just focus on having fun. But then after a while, fun ceases to be fun. I bought my car. When I came down here to Florida, I needed a new car. So I went to the car place and I bought a car. And the guy who sold me the car, really friendly old guy, much older than me. And I'm in my 70s. And I said to him, are you ever going to retire? And he said, I did. He said, I was the top salesman here. And I retired because I like to fish. And he said, I fished for 2 years and then realized that, if you just fish all day, it's not fun anymore. So I called them up and I said, can I have my job back? And they said, we'd love to have you back. And so here I am, and I'm having a great time working. And that's exactly the truth, that we find meaning in valuable things. And so what does this guy find out? He's gonna pleasure himself and have a great life. And he says, verse 2, I said of laughter, how stupid. And of pleasure, what does it accomplish? Because it doesn't accomplish much. And so then he's moving on. He's saying, okay, try that. Let's move on. I searched in my heart, verse 3, how to entice my flesh with wine. My heart's still guiding me with wisdom. If you've ever seen people that they get drunk and they're acting stupid and looking like they're having a good time. Okay, so he says, I'll try that out. So he entices his flesh with wine and how to embrace foolishness until I could see what is good for the sons of men, that they should do under heaven the number of days of their lives. But of course, that run out of joy too. So then, well, I know I'll busy myself doing great works. Verse 4, I made great works for myself. I built myself houses. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them trees of all kinds of fruit. I made pools of water for myself from which to water the groves of flourishing trees. And after a while, work is just work. If you don't believe in a God and tie it into a higher purpose, that's what makes work so powerful and worthwhile. So he did all this work, and it didn't do it for him. Verse 7, I bought male slaves and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I also had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than all who'd been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I know a little bit about this because Sue and I have a cousin who's a psychiatrist. He's long retired now, but he lived in California. And his sole clientele were the uber rich. And his job as a psychiatrist was to help the uber rich be happy. Because there's so many people that say, if I just had enough money to go out and buy what I want, travel what I want, I think I could be happy. But the fact of the matter is, the uber rich aren't happy either, because money doesn't make you happy. Money can solve some problems, but it doesn't give you that feeling of meaning of life, the feeling of worth and of genuine God felt, in your soul, happiness. And so he gathers silver and gold. He's got the treasure of kings and provinces, and then entertainment. Got to have entertainment. So he had male and female singers, and the delights of the sons of men, many beautiful concubines. So a lot of men think if I had a harem of beautiful girls, then I'd be happy. In my 54 years of ministry, I actually ran into a man one time who had a harem of women. And he said after a few years, it just didn't do it for me, and he got rid of them all. It's just, this is not going to give you happiness. Happiness comes from a different place. It's not coming from the material world. It's not coming from the world around us. Verse 9, he says, so I became great. I surpassed all those who'd been before me in Jerusalem, and still my wisdom remained with me. Verse 10, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my portion for all my labor. Verse 11, but when I turned to consider all the works that my hands had worked, and the labor that I'd labored to do, behold, all was pointless and hurting the wind, and there was no profit under the sun. And that's exactly right. If we don't have God, this is there's no profit under the sun in what we do or how we think or how much money we have or what we experience or where we've traveled. There's no real profit in any of that. Verse 12, I turned myself to consider wisdom, madness, and foolishness. For what can the man do who will come after the king, after me? Only that which has already been done. I've done it all. I've done the wisdom thing, the knowledge thing, the pleasure thing, the getting drunk thing, the women thing, the works and houses. I've done the silver and gold thing. I've done the entertainment singers type thing. And it's pointless. Verse 16, for of the wise man, even as of the fool, there's no lasting memory, seeing that in the days to come all will have been forgotten. And how will the wise man die? Just like the fool. And it's really true that the great men of history, some of the most powerful men of history, how many people know of Cambyses, one of the kings of Persia, who ruled really from the border of India to the border of Ethiopia, basically ruled almost the entire ancient world. And People haven't heard of him. People don't know how he died. Actually, the way he died is quite funny. Here he is, king of the whole blasted Middle East and much more. And he travels to one of his territories down to Egypt. Probably took him months and months to get there. And upon meeting, the Egyptian upper people, whatever, he leaps off his horse to greet them, to have them greet him. And when he leaps off his horse, his sword, which he had on his side, stabbed him in the calf, and he died of the infection. So it's it's like, really, he's the ruler of all this territory. Who's even heard of him? So it's just like it said, seeing in verse 16, there's no lasting memory, seeing that in the days to come all will have been forgotten. And how will the wise man die? Just like the fool. Verse 17. So I hated life and committed suicide. Well, he didn't commit suicide, but lots of people do. And and you can track it. You can go through this. What has the person done to understand the meaning of his life and the value of his life? If people really understand that, they don't commit suicide. And here's the writer of Ecclesiastes who understands. He's gone after wisdom, knowledge, pleasure, money, entertainment, all those things. And he realizes it's all pointless. I'm going to die. Nobody's going to remember me. Nobody's going to remember what I've done. And somebody else is going to manage all the things that I accumulated. So he hates life. And that's what happens. And the answer to this, as we continue to read in Ecclesiastes, is get God in your life. It's God who brings the value and the purpose to our lives, because what God does is everlasting. And then our lives are everlasting. And what we do will be meaningful and be everlasting. But in this case, he hadn't gotten there yet. So it says, verse 17, I hated life. And, honestly, I look at, you walk down the sidewalk of any busy street and you look at the faces of the people that are coming at you the other way, and you'd think everybody's dog just died. I mean, people are so unhappy just in life, and we don't need to be that way. In fact, that's one of the things that can be so winning about us, is that you and I can shine and sparkle and smile and laugh, and it's attractive to people, and that's important stuff, and it helps us witness and spread the gospel. But he says, I hated life because the work that is worked under the sun was distressing to me, for all is pointless and hurting the wind. Verse 18, and so I hated all my labor that I labored at under the sun. And that's important too, because America has a labor force problem. We have people that go to work and they don't care. They don't do a good job. They're sloppy. I'll tell you, how sloppy do they get? Well, let me tell you about how sloppy they get. I talked about the fact that I hooked up my wife's Volkswagen to the charger the wrong way and blew the alternator. So we call AAA. We have the guy come and tow the car to the auto shop. And Genevieve's got an auto shop she really likes. The guy pulls out of our driveway with the car. The auto shop's only about 10 minutes away. 3 hours later, Genevieve's heard nothing from the auto shop. And so she calls and says, so what's the deal? Is my car okay? I mean, what have you learned? And the proprietor says, well, what do you mean? You haven't sent your car here? And Genevieve's like, it's a 10-minute drive. It's been gone for 3 hours. What do you mean? And we start to panic. We think maybe that it was like a fake tow truck driver and he drove off with my wife's car. We didn't know what happened. But anyway, so we got the tow truck driver's number from AAA and called him, and he took the car to the wrong place. Now, we gave him the place, the name of the place, and the phone number and address of the place. And in spite of all that, he took the car to the wrong place. And the place he took it to didn't say, what are we doing with this? How did this arrive? And so, we were very relieved when we found her car and got the car. Of course, the tow truck driver then had to tow it for free to the right place. But he says he hates life in verse 17, and then 18, so he hated all his labor. If you don't have a purpose in your life for a cause that's higher than you, not only can you end up hating life and possibly committing suicide, but you don't like what you do. Why? Because it's pointless and hurting the wind. And so as a result, people do a bad job. We used to talk about early Americans and why America got ahead so fast, ahead of the rest of the world. And a lot of it was the Christian work ethic. And we've kind of lost our Christian work ethic in America. It doesn't surprise me if an atheist hates his work and doesn't do a good job, because it's right here in the Bible. So verse 18, so I hated all my labor that I labored at under the sun, but because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. Well, yeah, you'll be dead, so you're going to leave your work. If you and I are thinking about God and how God works in history, and we're thinking multi-generationally, then, Genevieve and I have discussions about our stuff and leaving it to our kids and leaving it to other people, and me leaving my theological library and who's going to get it and how's it going to help the best people and blah, 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 blah. It's not that, oh my gosh, I've done all this work and now I've got to leave it to somebody else. It's like, okay, this is part of my life, is not only making this life profitable, but making sure that the people after I'm gone are best helped with what I've got. And that's just part of being a Christian and understanding, Jesus Christ doesn't die, God doesn't die, they're still around. Their work continues. How can I help their work into the next generation? And STF, we've had people leave us when they die, they write us into their will and leave us some money or some books or whatever. And that's greatly appreciated. And that helps the work of the Lord continue. That's the kind of thing. But thinking about, okay, there's my life and what I can do for the Lord now and build up rewards as well. And then there's the next life and how can I help them? And that only comes from belief in God and what God's doing, and making yourself part of God's program instead of trying to make life part of your program, and that I'm going to discover the secret to having a really fun life. That's part of the whole gig in Ecclesiastes. You're not going to discover something that Solomon hasn't already tried. Solomon, whoever the king is. So he says, I hated all first of all, 17, he hates his life. Verse 18, he hates all his work. And he's worried about who's going to get his stuff. Verse 19, who knows whether he'll be a wise man or a fool? Yet he'll have rule over all my labor that I labored at, and in which I have been wise under the sun. This is pointless. It's not pointless if you're thinking generationally. It is pointless if you don't have God in the picture. Verse 20, so I turned about and gave my heart over to despair. And that's terrible. If whoever this king is, if he lived today, he'd be on a whole bunch of antidepressants. And that's just, he gave his heart over to despair. That's not where we want to be. We want to be joyful and blessed. And he said, I gave my heart over to despair concerning all the labor I'd labored at under the sun. For there's a man whose labor is with wisdom and with knowledge, with skill, yet he must leave his portion to a man who has not labored for it. This is pointless and a great evil. It's not pointless and a great evil if you're thinking about God multi-generationally. It's only pointless and a great evil if you're just being selfish and thinking about your own life and not realizing that you have an eternal destiny. Verse 22, for what does a person get from all his labor, from all the stress of his heart that he labors at under the sun? Verse 23, for all his days are pain and his business is frustrating. Yes, even at night his heart doesn't rest. This also is pointless. And then he starts to wake up. At this point, the author here, the sage, begins to shift. He says, there's nothing better for a person than he should eat and drink and make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it is from the hand of God. First mention of God in the whole book. That is from the hand of God. Yes, God gave you your time. God gave you the ability to work and to participate in the things that go on under the sun. And then verse 25, this powerful focus verse for who can eat or who can have enjoyment apart from him, apart from God. And this, by the way, gets very mishandled in the King James Version. It's been a long time since I've read it in the King James. I don't remember what it said, but it's not correct in the King James Version at all. That this is the pinnacle turning point for the writer of this book. Who can eat or who can have enjoyment apart from God? And that's really true. And that's when you and I run into depressed people, so many times, in our Christian ministry, as we go out and we're talking to people, you run into people that are depressed, that are frustrated. And so many times, and I forget this too, I'll be like, oh, tell me your problem. And the next thing you know, you're trying to solve a problem. I say, wait, John, stop, full stop, put the brakes on. Does the person have God in their life? Because it doesn't matter what problem you fix, if you can fix anything at all, if they don't have God, it's only going to be a few months or whatever until they're right back where they are. Because the answer to having a meaning in life, to where life becomes a blessing and purposeful, is getting God into the picture. Who can eat or who can have enjoyment apart from God? Verse 28, or 26 rather, for to the one who pleases him, God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, the godless, he gives the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is pointless and hurting the wind. So if you're pleasing God, then things begin to accumulate in your life and things begin to go right. And that's a tremendous blessing. Let's go to chapter 3. And chapter 3 is part of the wisdom of life. For everything, there's a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And this then is something that is easier to read than to actually incorporate into your life, because so many times we try to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. And learning when is the right time to say something, when is the right time to do something, how can I feel? Do I feel guilty at the wrong time? Do I feel blessed at the right, that kind of thing? So he says, verse 2, obviously, a time to be born and a time to die. And that's true. A time to plant, a time to uproot what was planted, a time to kill, and a time to heal. And absolutely, there is a time to kill. There is a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Amen to that. Verse 6, a time to search and a time to count it as lost. Let it go. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear, a time to sow. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. And these things are all true. And learning those different times and learning the rhythm of life really helps us in our life and walk to be the kind of people we want to be in the kind of relationships that we want to have. So there's a lot more in Ecclesiastes that we could go into. Like I say, there's multiple subjects in here. I have some of my favorite verses in here. One last thing, let's go to the last chapter of Ecclesiastes. Let's go to Ecclesiastes 12, because if you're going to focus on God, then you can't not focus on the day of judgment, because there will be a day of judgment and we will get rewarded for our works. And it's amazing to me how many people just never think about the day of judgment, because really, in many ways, we define our life by what we're going to be like when we're there. I have a kind of an overarching thought in my mind that at the day of judgment, I want to hear, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." That's what I want to hear on the day of judgment. I don't want to hear, "Well, you did okay." I wouldn't be bad if you have eternal life, but I want to hear, "Well done," and I focus on that, and I use that as a compass in my life. So in verse 12, the sage says, "My son, beware of anything beyond these, of the making of many books. There's no end. Much study is a weariness of the flesh. This is the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole purpose of humankind. For God will bring everything we do into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil." So we enjoy life, and we focus, and we love what we do because of God, and we know there's a coming judgment, and we know we're going to be rewarded no matter how tough this life gets. If I bear up under it well, I know that I'll be rewarded for it, because that everything we do will be brought into judgment. So thank you for your attention tonight. I trust you found this as a blessing.